All right, everybody, today is going to be a little bit different because I am broadcasting from the NESmaker studios here rather than in my guest room. This was where I was doing a lot more work, but obviously with the baby at home now, I'm usually confined to quarters, but today I was able to work from this NESmaker studios. So, today is the 4th day of NESmas. On the 4th day of NESmas, NESmaker gave to me the knowledge of how to design a screen. That one even rhymed. Okay, that's a win. That one even rhymed. We're good. We're going to actually start designing some screens around this character that we have created right now. And there's a couple of different ways to do it, believe it or not. Some of this tutorial is going to reference the first tutorial we did where we're going to be bringing in some graphics of our tile sets. So if you didn't quite understand that, you might want to go back and look at how to set up palettes and set up and work with the pixel editor. That's what the first tutorial was. We're really going to concentrate on quickly going through the pixel editor, setting up some tile sets, and then designing screens. And we're going to look at a lot of different ways that we can design screens today. So without further ado, let's go to our pixel editor. Boom. We are going to open up, this will automatically open up your graphic assets folder for this particular project. My project is called 12 Days of NESmas. On my desktop, I've got a folder called, what was it called? It was called Troll Christmas something. Troll Burner Saves Christmas. There we go. And I've got some background tiles here. So I'm going to load in these background tiles and I'm going to hit open. Okay, so these don't really look like much of anything right now, and we talked about why. We talked about the black, red, green, blue format. That's all in tutorial number 1. What we are going to do is we are going to set up a palette now, and I need to be able to see what this looks like through this palette. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to enable palette translation. Now there's a concept here that I want you guys to deeply understand, and that's the first color in your palettes. So generally for a background, we like to use black as the first color because what happens is the first color in every palette in your entire game is going to be the same. And since black appears commonly as an outline for just about everywhere, we like to use black. No matter what you do, if you change this, all of them change. Like that. See, all of them, all the first colors change. However, this tile set does not use black. This is actually a snow-covered mountain, so the background is supposed to be white. So in my background tiles, this actually gets me not too close from something I might actually want to see. I might flip some of these colors around, but I can start to see the shapes now. We've got snow. We've got this sort of lighter colored snow. This was the stupid palette that I just made at the beginning, just showing you how palettes worked. But I can see I've got a snowman. I've got kind of this little Santa's workshop house, Christmas trees, some ladders, some candy canes. We're going to go through and we are going to actually make the right palettes. But there's something else I want to show you first. So if I went and made this white, like I said, every palette is going to use the same first color in all the palettes, no matter that are loaded to the screen at a given time. Well, that means if this is loaded, check this out. I should expect to see white in the background of my game. So I'm going to save this what I'm doing right now is I'm taking this that I just created and I'm going to save as my background tile set. And yep, I want to replace it. So that's my background tile set 0. And I'm going to now just test my game real quick. So here's something funny that happens. And I wanted to explain why, and this is a perfect opportunity to do it. So I can see that tile 0 showed up on my screen. That's what this is and what we're seeing. But the background's black. I thought it was supposed to be white. All the colors were supposed to be white. Inside Messin, if I hit Control P, this brings up my picture processing unit viewer. And I can kind of see what's going on. If I go over to my CHR viewer, I can see these are the sprites that are loaded. These are the background tiles that are loaded. If I go to my palette viewer, this is what's happening. So why did all these colors come in black? Well, it's because in NESmaker 4.5.x, the background palettes are loaded first, and then the sprite palettes are loaded. The last palette to be loaded was this one right here. these ones over here, in which case the first color is black. So if I change any of these colors at any time to a different color, all of them will change. Pretty simple fix. All I've got to do, if that happens to me, if I go to my object palette, I know I'm using this palette in my game for my objects. If I go into my game objects and I go to my player, I know I'm using this color right here. I can change this to white. This will now be the last one that loads, and this should change to white too. It should automatically. It will. It just didn't automatically update on the screen here. It didn't refresh. But this is the color that's going to load. Now, don't worry about what it looks like on here, because it's for sprites. These first colors are transparent. We're not going to see them. No matter what color I put there, we're not going to see it show up on my game anyway. Now, what'll happen is that the background palette will load first, and then the sprite palettes will load, and ultimately this first color will end up being white, and now it'll look like that snowy landscape that it looked like in my pixel editor. So let's check this out. There we go. So now I have snow, and my character does still move around. Oh, you know what? I forgot the last step I did before we broke yesterday was I changed this screen type to start screen. I'm going to change it back to main game. And your inputs, we did do a couple stupid things at the end. I'm going to just remove everything except for the movement. So right at shoot projectile, I'm going to remove all that. And we were probably going to bring it back. This is all the controller 2 stuff that we did. You might have already removed this, but I'm going to remove everything except for the start moving, stop moving, change to moving action, change to stop action. And don't forget back in your overworld to change this screen back to main game if you haven't already done that. So now I can move around in my snow. Awesome. So there we go. So now let me go through, and I'm going to actually, just from right here, I've already got the tile set loaded in. I'm going to make what looks like good palettes for these. This actually doesn't look like a terrible palette for this house right here. This one right here, I probably am going to want some like green trim for trees, I guess. So maybe my, this color here should be green. And this color could be like a darker green, maybe. Like that. I don't know. And this color can be like a red. Maybe that's starting to look good for a Christmas tree. I don't know. This may be much darker green or a much lighter green like that. Maybe. Maybe this should be a shadow color. I'm just looking at this tree right here. Maybe this should be my red color. Yeah, I actually like that. I'm going to make it a little bit brighter red. But now, yeah, this looks like a Christmas tree now. This looks like a Christmas tree now. This looks like a peppermint. You know, this looks like Santa's sleigh. Okay, and I could make some more palettes here. So what I'm going to do now is just really quickly, I'm going to start to paint to this screen, and I can paint tiles to the screen very easily. What I can do is I can grab one of the tiles by clicking on it, and you can see when I've got it selected, my mouse turns into that. The icon underneath my mouse turns into that. So if I click, I can place that tile, and it will place it with the color palette that I've got selected. So I could also place Christmas trees around this house like this. I can place a Santa's reindeer here. Probably would want a different color than this, but you get the idea. And you can see how I can go through and I can construct a screen this way. Now, this is not doing anything with collision data. This is not doing anything with this. All this is doing is adding tiles and their colors and dropping them into the screen. So now if I press play, those things will show up. Awesome. They do show up, but they don't do anything. They don't stop me from moving or anything like that. So what I need to do is I need to add collision. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways that you can add collision. One is that we have a bunch of collisions. Now, these collision definitions were loaded in when we loaded the maze module back in step 1, if you remember that. If you want to see what me talking about modules in depth, look at the tutorial number 1, the first day of NESmas here. What these do, these really are just labels. They don't, changing the label doesn't change what the tile type does. Changing the code that's associated changes what the tile type does. Where's that code located? Okay, I'm just going to remember the first 3. Walk, solid, hurt. I'll remember the first 4. Walk, solid, hurt, warp. Walk, solid, hurt, warp. Walk, solid, hurt, warp. Great. If I go into my project settings and I go to script settings, I can scroll down to tile types. Blank is walk. Solid is solid. Hurt is maze base. My recoil hurt is hurt. And warp is warp to screen for my maze base. So these scripts are what make that actually happen. These were loaded in when we loaded the maze game module. Now keep in mind, every game, these might work a little bit differently. For instance, this has a recoil paradigm for when you run into a hurt tile. Okay, well, you might not have a hurt tile type in some games. You might not have recoil in some type of games. It might be instant death when you run into this. You might make tile type number 13 your hurt tile instead. So we can actually go through and we could assign tile types, find my platformer and find my tiles, and I can load in a tile type to this if it makes any sense and if the code for that works with the rest of the scripts. For instance, if I have a game that depends on gravity like a platform or like a platformer, and I have a tile type that deals with gravity somehow, but I have a physics engine that I've loaded that's more for a top-down game, I'm not going to all of a sudden have gravity because my physics didn't respect gravity. So I've got to be careful when I start mixing these modules and genres, but once you know how the code works, it'll actually be pretty easy to navigate around, and people are creating new scripts for each module all the time. Let's just take a look at what solid does. I'm going to hit edit. That's going to bring it up, and what it does is it loads my object byte, it ORs in the last bit, and it stores it back. What this is telling my physics engine is when this is flipped to a 1, it can either be 0 or a 1. When this 0 bit of object update byte is a 1, that means do solid stuff. So in this case, what does do solid stuff do? Well, let's take a look at right now it's not really going to do much of anything, but what I could do is if I look at my edge reactions, I've got different solid reactions that we could do. So for instance, stop on solid. If I look at what stop on solid does, it zeroes out all of my movement script, all of my inertia. It stores 0 to everything. It basically just blanks out everything. So this might be what I want to do with, say, my player. So what I could do is I could say, okay, look, player, I want you, when you get to a solid object, I want you to stop. And I'm going to hit close. And so now what I could do is if I go back to overworld, I can tell these to be solid. And how I can tell these to be solid, there's a few different ways. First of all, I can go to my collision, change it to solid. And if I paint with 0, I'm changing it to solid. I'm typing 0. If I hold 0, I can click and drag. And how do I know it's working? Well, up at the top of the screen here, you can see these are null walkable. When I go over one of those, there it's solid. The other way I could tell, if I turn on collision, I can now see what value each of these squares has. So these, for instance, are solid. I'm going to make these solid as well. I'm going to hit 0 here and 0 here. The other thing I can do is whether I have this on or off, it doesn't really matter. I can right-click. Oops, sorry, collision. I can right-click on one of these, modify attribute, and make it solid. And you can see it change to 1. And it'll work too if I don't have that on. I can modify attribute and make it solid. Okay, so now let me test the game. Now my physics engine knows what to do when it's solid. We looked at the script that does that. It just zeroes out my motion. So it knows what to do when it collides with a solid object based on the settings that I set up. So now we've actually got enough to set up sort of a little maze area where my character can only go in certain places. We still haven't set up what happens at the edges, right? We still haven't even defined the edges of this screen. But we do have solid working. So cool. Now we know how to do that. The other way that we can do it, the other way that we can actually create these sort of assets to drop in without having to paint the tile and the solid independently, is we can make what are called assets. So to do that, I can go into all graphics, which is in project, and go to assets. I could choose what tile site I'm looking at. Right now I'm looking at this one. And I could pick one of the assets. And I can resize this too. So let's say I want to make a clump of snowmen for some reason. This looks stupid, but let's just go with it. Clump of snowmen. I can also determine what collision each of these uses. So for instance, they could all have different collisions. I could have a house that in the middle of it had a walkable doorway or something like that. So I've made these all solid, and now I can call this snowman and save it. This is now stored the tile data, the color data, and the collision data. And if I go back to my screen, instead of having to paint 4 of these and then go to solid and then paint with 0, it's not like that took that long, but I could just grab the asset, boom. And now all of that's done just with one click. So now if I look, I put my mouse over, you can see up here, these are all observing the collision information, the color information, and the tile information. So let me test that real quick. And you can see now I've got solid collisions. Great. Now, what about this stuff right here, this blank area right here? Because the tile set is only this big. Well, right, for this, we're going to talk about tile layout, and we're going to talk about what we are actually seeing here. But I'm going to start a new screen for that. So I'm just going to pick a different screen. I'm going to go here. Now I'm not going to mess up the original screen that I did. Let's first talk about tile layout. This is how your tiles are laying out for the screen that you're using, and every screen has its own tile layout. There are a bunch of different types of layouts that you can choose from by default. The default one is a main tile set, like the one we have loaded, a screen-specific tile set, a path tile set, and paths we're going to go over in probably a different video, and then your HUD tile set, which is usually your letters and your numbers and things like that, that will populate the stuff for the HUD, like if you have health or score or whatever. They're going to need stuff that's in this area. Okay, but that's not the only type of layout that you can use. I could also use double main, which gets rid of the paths and the screen-specific tile set and allows you to load 2 different tile sets to this screen at a time. I also have double main no HUD, which means if I have a game that doesn't use a HUD and I don't need those letters and numbers, I can actually do it where I have one main tile set, a second main tile set, a screen-specific tile set, and another screen-specific tile set, which maximizes it. Basically gives me a full page of tiles that I can play with, and I can mix and match them from screen to screen. I also have partial paths, like this is a main tile set, two screen tile sets, half of a path tile set, and a HUD. So there's different combinations that you could use. Some of the more common ones that I've seen people use are the normal one, double main, and a lot of people just skip using paths altogether. So they'll use a main and 3 screen specifics and a HUD. So those are some of the common ones, and you could set this up however you want to. And I'll show you an example of when you might use this. Let's hit cancel real quick. I'm going to go to my pixel editor. I'm going to make a new tab by going to pixel editor, add tab. And I'm going to remove this one. Sorry, I didn't mean to add 2. So in my second tab, I'm going to go to my desktop, and I can see I've got, I believe this is, so this is a screen-specific tile set. And for me right now, it is a cartridge. And I think I need to force the square aspect ratio. There we go. So it's a little bit wide. It looks a little bit wide for NES cartridge, but I can tell it's a NES cartridge. So this is a screen-specific tile set. This is the size of a screen-specific tile set. I can now save this, and when I save this, instead of saving it to a main tile set, I'm going to save it to a screen-specific tile set. I'm going to hit save. Now, if I go back to my overworld, the 0th screen-specific tile set is that cartridge, so I see it appear right here, and now I've got these cartridges that I can collect. Whereas now I'll go to my second screen here, and I can see it's there. If I go into my tile layout here, and I were to go main, double main, you can see now I don't have that to load because I'm not showing any screen-specific tile sets. So this is just a way that you can mix and match different groups of your tiles, especially for screens that are screen-by-screen games. It gets a little bit more complicated if you're doing scrolling games, because the only time that you can load with NESmaker, the only time you can load new tile sets is when a screen first loads. So if you have this as all one scrolling level, this whole row right here, the only screen that is going to be able to load the tile sets is this first one. The tiles load when the screen is turned off. So when you're changing rooms, when you're going from screen to screen, that's when the tile sets load. So if you put tiles here and put different tiles here and you put different tiles here, you're going to see some really weird artifacts in your screen. Only the tiles that you load on the first screen are going to load. That's, again, I'm just talking about for scrolling games where you're not turning off the screen from screen to screen. Okay, so those are some things to keep in mind when you're designing games. If you're making a scrolling game and you're wondering why your tiles look weird, first think about that. Are they all using the same tile sets and the same tile set layout? Now let's make the cartridge something that I want to get. I can right click on it, modify attribute, make it a prize. And I'll do the same thing for this one. Right click, modify attribute, make it a prize. Now, I react differently with prizes than I do with solid objects. So if I go into my project settings, I go to my script settings, I'm going to scroll down to the tile that is for a maze prize and hit edit. Now, this is what it's going to do. First, it's going to say, hey, is the object running into me a player? If it is, jump to his player. If not, nope, not the player. It's going to jump right past this stuff. Then it's going to change tile at collision. So where the collision occurred, it's going to change the tile from the one that looks like the NES to the 0 tile with a 0 collision type. The 0 collision type is nothing. So that's walkable. If you remember right, it's a null value, walkable, right? It's also going to add a value to the score, and it's going to update the HUD element. Now, we don't have a score drawing to our game yet. This may have some anomalous results. It might try and draw something somewhere on the screen because we haven't set this part up yet. But it will change the tile at the collision, and it will make it all of a sudden walkable, so I can only collect it one time. So let's take a look at this in action. I'm going to walk over and collect the prize. And you can see this is still solid, and this is a prize. So now we have multiple types of tile on the screen. We can actually start constructing a screen that has me walk through a maze to pick up things, kind of like Pac-Man, where you're collecting all the pellets, right? So obviously I collected them all and nothing happened. Well, that's because that's not the way that this engine works by default. But we can also make that happen, and we'll deal with that in a later tutorial. Right now, we're just collecting things. We're walking around the screen. We're picking up these NES cartridges that the devious or careless elves have dropped and left behind. We're going to find out why soon. But yeah, so that's a real quick primer to sort of like how to deal with drawing tiles. Let me show you one or two more things. You can draw more than one tile at one time. Like let's say I wanted to draw both of these poles next to each other. I can hold the shift key, click and drag. And that is, it's really hard to see because it's a white rectangle, but it's selected both of these. And you can see as I'm moving my mouse around, they're both selected, and I can click, and it places them both there. Now again, that's not placing any collision data, that's just placing the tile data. So that's one thing I can do. Now let's say I want to copy and paste this. The other thing that sometimes happens is you notice that this thing is following me. Like this cursor, this under cursor is following me. If I hit escape while my mouse is on the screen, that goes away. And now I have nothing selected. Sometimes you want that. For instance, I want to make an exact copy of this house and tree area. Tiles, collision data, and color scheme all at the same time. If I hold shift and click and drag an area, and again, it's very hard to see because it's white. So for just a second, I'm going to change this to yellow so you can see. Okay. So we can see that that area is selected. If I hit Control C and that white rectangle goes away. Oops. Try that again. Sorry. Control C. Now I can press Control V somewhere and it will paste that in over the top of whatever's there. And you can notice here my collisions are pasting in as well. Let me change that back to white. Good. So we can copy and paste that way. That's another thing that we can do as far as the tile sets are concerned and moving tiles around the screen and stuff like that. One other thing that's super valuable when you're designing a series of screens, I can see that I have some solid tiles over here, right? And so if I were to come onto the screen, I don't want to come onto the screen right here, right? Because then I get stuck inside that solid tile. So if I were to make a screen right here, I'll double click on it. If I was to make a screen right here and it automatically loaded my 0 default values, I can see that I can see the ghost image of the created screen off to the side of it. So that means I'd probably want to do this. I'd probably want to put trees here. That way I can't ever possibly go into that area. But sometimes I need to see more of this screen. Sometimes I need to see a little bit more of it. I can actually show up to a half of a screen in all directions. If I move my mouse over, I'm going to hit escape to get rid of that ghost image right there. If I press the plus sign, you could see it zoomed out. And if I had screens here and here and here, you'd actually see them. And that's up to a half a screen. So I can really kind of see the screen next to me. I can't affect it, but I can see it. And now I can more easily build. So for instance, if I wanted to emulate sort of this over here and make it sort of symmetrical, I could do that like this. And now I can see there's sort of a symmetry to these screens. And if I hit minus while my mouse is here, it zooms back out. So that's a fun trick. Another quick keyboard shortcut is that I can use my arrow keys to go from screen to screen. So if I go to a screen that isn't created yet, well, what it just did was it did the exact same thing as if I double clicked on that screen from the map view and created a blank screen. So if I look at my overworld, you could see it created a blank screen when I tried to navigate to it there. A couple things about the map that are kind of fun. We're not going to go over all the features of the map in this tutorial because we're just about out of time. But what I can do is I can hit Control and hold one of these screens. Control Shift and hold one of these screens, and that makes a duplicate of it. If I hit Control Shift and put it over a screen that already exists, it swaps them. So if I want to make duplicates of these screens, like if I'm making a platform game, they're all supposed to have the same specifics. I can just Control Shift and drag them across. If all of a sudden I realize, man, this screen should really be here and this one should be here, if I Control Shift and drag it over a screen that already exists, it swaps them. It doesn't erase the one that was there. It just takes all the data and puts it over in the other screen. The other thing I could do is if I wanted to make a duplicate, I could click on this and I could slowly press Control C. Someone's got to hold it a little bit to make it work. And I could go to another screen and I can Control V and it'll paste the screen and all of its attributes to that new screen. So that's a first sort of stab at seeing how the map works with screens. We're going to talk a lot more about the map, especially about some of these features here, especially about the coordinates when we start dealing with warping from screen to screen and that stuff. But I think that's a good start for today because really what today was focused on is how to use tile sets, how to load tile sets, where to save new tile sets, how to put them on the screen, how to deal with collisions, how to make assets, And I hope that gives you a lot of ideas on getting started adding your own elements to your game. So I hope this has been beneficial. Again, if you are just seeing these things and you don't have NESmaker, but you want to get involved, www.thenew8bitheroes. It's in the description. We definitely want you to get involved. We'd love to see new users in 2021. I hope everyone's having a wonderful holiday season, and I will see you tomorrow for the 5th day of NESmas.